The Invisible Worker, New York City, a place where dreams are either born in glitter or buried in concrete. In the heart of Manhattan's financial district stood a glass giant, Harrington and Cole Enterprises, a fortress of commerce and cold ambition. It pierced the skyline like a sword raised in conquest. With 48 floors of tinted windows, imported marble, and cutthroat executives, the building breathed the scent of superiority. It was not a place that welcomed humility. It barely noticed it. Each morning, the rhythm began like a symphony of routine. Black town cars lined the streets. Louboutin heels clicked over pavement. Freshly tailored suits drifted through revolving doors. Elevators chimed, lats steamed, and somewhere beneath the polished surface, the building's real gears turned quietly. Evelyn Monroe was one of those unseen gears. At 5:27 a.m., before the first espresso machine hissed or the conference rooms lit up, she was already inside, moving like a shadow. She wore a navy blue uniform, one that blended into the granite gray walls. Her badge read Temporary Janitorial Staff, her name printed in fine font below it. No one read it. Few even looked. Evelyn's cart was always clean, organized like a soldier's kit. Disinfectant on the left, polish on the right, microfiber cloths folded with military precision. She pushed it with quiet grace, her movements fluid and composed, almost ballet-like. There was no rush, no clatter. Everything she did was efficient, methodical. She was always careful to avoid the paths of incoming employees. If a junior analyst scrolled on their phone without watching where they were going, she would sidestep silently. If an executive spilled their coffee in the hallway and cursed under their breath, she was already there to clean it before their apology was complete, if one came at all. But what stood out most about Evelyn was her eyes. Sharp, observant, calm. Though her hands scrubbed windows and mopped floors, her gaze often lingered, reading body language, listening to tone, measuring the weight of a room in silence. She never gossiped, never interrupted, never mingled. Her presence was so subtle that most of the office didn't even realize she passed through their space daily. To them, she was the background noise, like the humming of the HVAC or the flicker of the overhead lights. Necessary, but invisible. She didn't seem to mind. One morning, as Evelyn polished the brass plaque at the building's entrance, a young intern named Jody paused and watched her for a second. "You're always here before everyone," she said, sipping her iced coffee. "Like, always. Don't you ever get tired?" Evelyn looked up, smiled softly, and replied, "Sometimes. But I like the quiet. It teaches you things." Jody blinked. "Like what?" "That the loudest people usually have the least to say." Jody giggled, unsure whether it was a joke or wisdom. Then her phone buzzed, and she was gone. Evelyn didn't take offense. She understood the world she was in. At Harrington and Cole, the hierarchy was gospel. Executives dined in rooftop lounges, their names etched on golden doors. Managers stalked the mid-floors, fighting over performance metrics and cost reports. Interns floated like lost ducklings, trying to avoid drowning. And below them all, at the very bottom, was the janitorial staff, hired through third-party vendors, paid hourly, and expected to remain unseen. They entered through service doors and were told to stay off the main elevators during business hours, rules that Evelyn followed with the same quiet diligence she applied to her work. But what no one saw, what not even the building's internal database could reveal, was that Evelyn Monroe had once worn suits far more expensive than any in the building. She had once sat on panels, negotiated seven-figure contracts, and been called the quiet storm of Wall Street. A financial analyst turned entrepreneur, she had built a private venture firm from scratch in her early 30s. Then tragedy struck. Her husband, Marcus, a gifted architect, and her only family, died in a car crash just 3 blocks from their brownstone. It was raining. The driver who hit him was texting. Evelyn vanished after the funeral, closed her firm, deleted her LinkedIn. She left behind her past, like a coat no longer worth wearing. For years, she wandered through the states, doing odd work, volunteering, avoiding public life. But something brought her back to New York. Not vengeance, not legacy. Something quieter, something she hadn't yet defined. That something had led her to Harrington and Cole. The company had been on her radar years ago. Aggressive in acquisitions, reckless with power. Its CEO, Garrett Langford, was infamous for slashing departments and pocketing bonuses. He prided himself on being a disruptor, but most saw him as a corporate predator. Evelyn hadn't come for him. Not directly. But she felt a pull toward the tower he ruled from. And so, under a different name, with forged references and a fake resume, she applied for janitorial work through a third-party facilities vendor. She was hired within 2 days. And for 5 months she watched. Watched how the senior managers ignored the people who cleaned up after them. Watched how Garrett would walk past his employees without so much as a glance. Watched how the receptionist cried quietly in the bathroom after being scolded for wearing last year's shoes. Watched how the HR director scheduled meetings with people 5 minutes before firing them. She saw a culture of cruelty. Not explosive, not dramatic, but subtle, sustained, and systemic. She watched and waited. Then came the day it changed. It was a Wednesday. Rain spattered the windows. The mood in the building was tenser than usual. A major merger deal had collapsed the night before, and Garrett was reportedly in a mood. Evelyn knew this because she'd overheard 2 assistants whispering about it near the break room. She stored the details silently, like she always did. As she stepped onto the executive floor that morning to polish the hallway's chrome trim, the air changed. The atmosphere was taut. The elevator dinged. Garrett Langford emerged. Tall, severe, and always flanked by tension, Garrett was a man who didn't walk. He marched. His presence was magnetic and threatening all at once. People stepped aside like he carried a gravitational field. Evelyn didn't make eye contact. She didn't need to. She simply continued polishing the metal panel on the wall, cloth moving in steady circles. Then his voice sliced through the hallway like a blade. "You." She turned. He was pointing at her shoes. His were soaked at the bottom with gray city sludge. "You people are supposed to clean these floors, not turn them into mud puddles," he snapped. "What the hell do I pay your kind for?" A few people froze mid-step. No one spoke. Evelyn stood straight. She didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "Sorry doesn't clean my shoes," he spat. "Do it. Now." Time stood still. A junior assistant at the end of the hall pulled out his phone. Another ducked into the copy room, pretending not to hear. Evelyn stared at Garrett, then slowly knelt down, took a fresh cloth from her pocket, and began to gently wipe the wet grime from his leather shoes. Not with anger, not with shame, just clarity. Her hands moved calmly. Her eyes never met his. Garrett huffed and looked at the people nearby. "Let this be a lesson. If you want something done right, don't trust the help." The words hung in the air. When Evelyn stood, she said nothing. She simply handed him the cloth, nodded once, and walked away. Behind her, something shifted. A current, a ripple, something no one could yet name. But it had begun. Whispers in the marble halls. The moment Evelyn walked away from Garrett Langford, the CEO of Harrington and Cole, after being forced to kneel and clean his shoes, something invisible cracked in the building's marble-lined walls. It wasn't loud. There was no uproar or protest. Not yet, but something shifted, like the deep creaking of a bridge moments before the strain gives way. The building returned to its rhythm, or tried to. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, emails buzzed across screens. But the people in those glass offices had seen something they couldn't unsee. They had watched a janitor, a woman who had quietly passed through their workdays for months, forced to the ground, and humiliated by the highest authority in the building. Some looked away, others stayed frozen, and a few recorded discreetly behind half-closed blinds. but no one had intervened. And that silence began to haunt them. The video clip made its way through internal Slack channels by noon. Subject line: Langford lost it. Wetch DS. It was only 13 seconds long. Blurry, a bit shaky, but the footage was clear enough. The powerful CEO pointing, ordering, and sneering while a janitor quietly obeyed, stooping to wipe filth from his $1,000 shoes. Within hours, the clip leaked outside the building. By 3:00 p.m., it was on Twitter. By 5:00 p.m., it was viral. #CleanedByPower began trending by evening, not because people knew who Evelyn was yet, but because the image struck a chord, the image of class, power, and cruelty, all captured in a silent moment of submission. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat on a wooden bench in the staff locker room, her uniform folded neatly on her lap, hands calm, expression unreadable. Beside her sat Rosa, a fellow janitor from Guatemala who had worked in the building for over a year. "Are you okay?" Rosa asked in Spanish, eyes wide with worry. Evelyn nodded. "Yes. You didn't deserve that. None of us do." "I know," Evelyn replied softly. There was a pause. Rosa looked like she wanted to say more but didn't know how. After a moment, she simply said, "People saw it. I heard some managers talking. They're ashamed." Evelyn turned her gaze toward the door. "They should be." And with that, she stood, buttoned her jacket, and stepped out, not through the back, but through the main lobby, in full view of the company she had quietly served for months. Upstairs, Garrett Langford was in damage control. His office, an intimidating expanse of black glass, designer furniture, and minimalism, was suddenly filled with panicked voices. PR executives, legal advisors, his chief operating officer, Rachel Vaughn, stood with arms crossed tightly, trying not to lose composure. "You humiliated a woman on camera, Garrett," Rachel snapped. "A janitor." She was mouthing off. Garrett growled, pouring himself a scotch. "And I didn't humiliate her. I made an example. The floors were a mess. I pay for order." "You made her clean your shoes while people watched," Rachel hissed. "You're not a Roman emperor." He scoffed. "She's lucky to have a job. You know how many people want to work in this building." "People don't want to kneel, Garrett. They want to live." He turned toward her, glass in hand. "It'll blow over. It always does." Rachel stared at him. For the first time, he looked smaller. Not in stature, but in character. She didn't reply. She just walked out. But outside the tower, the world was watching. By morning, national news outlets were reporting on the shoe-shining CEO scandal. Protesters began gathering near the building's entrance. They held signs that read, "Invisible no more. Dignity can't be mopped away. We all saw you." Employees inside started calling out sick. A few executives publicly condemned Garrett's behavior on LinkedIn. One anonymous email chain with the subject line, "Enough is enough," began circulating internally, detailing a long list of toxic workplace behaviors tolerated under Garrett's leadership. Meanwhile, no one could find Evelyn. She hadn't returned home to the small studio apartment where her name was listed under an alias. She hadn't shown up at any of her usual places. Her employee profile had been deactivated before lunch. But the silence wasn't disappearance. It was preparation. A week later, a mysterious email arrived in the inboxes of all Harrington and Cole employees. From Evelyn M. Subject: The view from the floor. Attached was a 23-page document. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't even angry. It was a detailed account of everything Evelyn had witnessed during her months in the building. How mid-level managers used threats to increase productivity without increasing pay. How lower-tier employees were routinely fired before benefits kicked in. How Garrett Langford had pocketed over $20 million in efficiency bonuses by cutting custodial contracts and outsourcing to unstable vendors. Each page was backed with discrete photos, time-stamped memos, and audio snippets recorded from the janitorial service rooms, small spaces where confidential conversations often spilled carelessly from boardrooms. She signed it, Evelyn Monroe, former founder, Monroe Capital Group. Shock exploded through the company like a bomb blast. People remembered her name now. Monroe Capital had been a rising star a decade ago, a firm that prioritized ethical investing and mentorship for women of color in finance. Evelyn had been celebrated in Forbes, Business Insider, and even given a TED talk titled Power with Purpose. And here she was, the janitor, the invisible woman, the one forced to kneel, now fully seen and fully armed. That same day, media trucks crowded outside Harrington and Cole's building. Protesters doubled in size. The janitorial vendor released a statement denouncing Garrett's actions and launched a formal complaint. High-profile figures in business and politics began sharing Evelyn's story with the hashtag Evelyn Monroe Matters. Rachel Vaughn, the COO, called an emergency board meeting. "This isn't just a PR disaster," she said, holding Evelyn's email printout. "This is moral failure, top to bottom." One board member, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned in. And she was here, among us, watching everything. Rachel nodded. She knew what she was doing. This wasn't revenge, it was exposure. The board chair leaned back, exhaled, and said what no one else dared. "It's time we consider removing Garrett Langford." That night, Evelyn stood in Central Park, beneath a quiet canopy of stars. The city's roar echoed far off, muffled behind trees. Her phone vibrated. A message from a blocked number. "You've made your point. Let's talk. GL." She didn't reply. Instead, she turned to the camera crew that had just arrived at the park. She was scheduled to sit down for an exclusive interview with 60 Minutes. Not to destroy Harrington and Cole, but to change something bigger. To tell the story of dignity, of what happens when silence watches cruelty long enough, and finally speaks. The return of Evelyn Monroe. It had been 11 days since the video had gone viral. 11 days since a janitor, silent, graceful, invisible, had been humiliated before a sea of corporate onlookers and reduced, by one man's pride, to a symbol of systemic power abuse. But now, the world knew her name, Evelyn Monroe. And for the first time in a long time, the world was listening. The interview. Central Park's familiar skyline shimmered in the early evening as cameras clicked on, and the iconic 60 Minutes timer ticked toward the top of the hour. Evelyn sat across from journalist Dana Albright, composed and still in the same simple gray coat she had worn in her last day on the job. No makeup crew, no glam team. She had declined it all. Her story didn't need adornment. Dana leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, why come back as a janitor?" There was a pause. Evelyn's eyes, dark and steady, didn't waver. "Because I needed to see it from the ground," she said. "When you're at the top too long, you forget what power really looks like from below. I wanted to see what corporate culture had become, not from a boardroom, but from the basement." Dana blinked, visibly moved. Evelyn continued. "They say the janitor knows all the secrets. That's true. Not because we snoop, but because no one notices we're there. You hear things. You see things. You feel how disposable people become when they don't wear a title." "And the CEO?" Dana asked gently. Evelyn smiled faintly. He mistook silence for weakness. That's a mistake a lot of powerful people make. Shockwaves in the industry. The interview aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, Wall Street had responded. Harrington and Cole's stock dropped 18%. Their top investor, Barron Eastbridge Capital, issued a public letter demanding a full leadership audit. Human rights organizations hailed Evelyn's actions as a pioneering example of reverse leadership, when former executives immersed themselves among everyday employees to uncover truth. Corporate America took a hard look at itself. Whispers echoed in skyscraper corridors across New York, Chicago, London. Did you hear about the Janitor CEO? She exposed her own company without a word. What if someone's doing that here? Boardroom meetings turned anxious. Memos were drafted. HR departments scrambled to rewrite policy handbooks. New words entered corporate vocabulary: humility, integrity, empathy, as if they'd never existed before. Inside Harrington and Cole, Garrett Langford's office had never been quieter. He stood at the window, looking out over a city that no longer bent to him. The city was watching now, with judgment, with fury, and with memory. He still refused to believe the full weight of what had happened. They're all overreacting, he muttered as his assistant read the fourth resignation letter that week. She's just bitter. His assistant didn't respond. She had stopped arguing with him days ago. But the board wasn't silent. A vote had been scheduled for Friday. Garrett had 3 days left as CEO, unless a miracle intervened. Desperate, he reached out to the one person he never thought he would. The meeting. Evelyn arrived at the penthouse suite of the Montclair Hotel on Wednesday evening. She wore a deep navy suit, crisp and unassuming. The front desk manager personally escorted her to the executive suite. Garrett had reserved the entire floor. He stood when she entered, tired, paler than usual, still dressed in designer arrogance, but the lines on his face were heavier now. "Evelyn," he said quietly. "Mr. Langford," she returned eagerly. He gestured toward a seat across from him at the large glass table. "Can we talk? Not as enemies." She sat, folding her hands. "Go on." "I was wrong," he began, though his voice was stiff. "What I did, it wasn't right. I let my stress, my pride, take over. I didn't know who you were." "That's the point," Evelyn said calmly. "You shouldn't have needed to." He flinched. "I get that now." She leaned in slightly. "Do you?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I do. I lost control. I treated someone beneath me like they were beneath me. And now I'm paying for it." "You're not paying," she corrected. "You're being seen." Silence stretched for a beat. He finally said, "I need your help. The board's going to remove me." "They should. But what if?" He hesitated. "What if we work together to fix this?" Evelyn raised a brow. "You want me to clean up your mess?" "No, I want you to help me lead differently. As a partner." Evelyn studied him carefully. "You had the chance to lead right the first time. You chose power. You chose humiliation. I was blind." "You were comfortable," she said. "There's a difference." Another long pause. He tried again. "What if I step down and recommend you take over?" That surprised her. "I don't think the board would agree," she replied. "They trust me, despite everything. You could return Harrington and Cole to something real, something human." Evelyn sat back, thoughtful. "That would mean working with people who looked through me, walked past me, pretended I didn't exist. Then teach them to see." The boardroom reckoning. Friday morning. The boardroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. The vote was set. Legal counsel was on standby. Journalists waited just outside the building, their lenses hungry for Garrett's exit. But when the doors opened, it wasn't Garrett who entered first. It was Evelyn. The room fell into stunned silence. She walked to the front of the table, placed a thick folder down, and said clearly, "Before you vote, I'd like to speak." No one stopped her. She told them of what she had seen, not just as a janitor, but as a witness. She spoke not in anger, but in unwavering truth. Then she opened the folder. Inside were plans, not revenge, but restoration. A proposal. A new branch of Harrington and Cole focused on ethical restructuring, with real power given to the workers. Wage transparency, blind recruitment, community reinvestment, a new leadership structure where CEOs would spend 1 week each quarter working on the ground level of the company they ran. She called it the Floorwalk Initiative, and then she said, Garrett Langford has failed. But what comes next doesn't have to. The board voted. Garrett was removed. Evelyn Monroe was named interim CEO. Aftermath. The news spread faster than the scandal had. From janitor to CEO, Evelyn Monroe appointed to lead corporate giant. The floor walk revolution. Will other companies follow? Power, dignity, and redemption. A new chapter begins. Employees return to work with new energy. Not out of fear, but hope. Evelyn didn't issue punishments. She opened doors. Town halls were scheduled weekly. Anonymous employee feedback forms were implemented and read aloud during executive meetings. Her leadership was firm, but fair, focused, transparent. She didn't try to erase the past. She used it as fuel. And across the city, in other companies, other janitors stood a little taller. Other assistants, delivery workers, and security guards began speaking out. A shift had begun, not because of a scandal, but because one woman had refused to disappear. Walls that don't fall easily. The morning sun spilled across the Manhattan skyline, its golden hue kissing the steel ribs of skyscrapers and high-rises. Evelyn Monroe stood at the edge of her new office, one she never imagined she'd step into again, not like this. The glass pane stretched from floor to ceiling, giving her a commanding view of the city below. She wasn't staring at it with awe. She was studying it, because power wasn't just a position. It was a promise, and the higher you stood, the more people could see whether you'd keep it or not. Her name was etched on the office door now. Evelyn Monroe, interim CEO. But titles didn't change culture. They didn't undo rot. And as she'd soon learn, the real resistance was not the chaos from the public, nor the pressure from the media, but the quiet, smiling, well-dressed war happening right inside the company. Welcome to the Shark Tank. Monday morning began with her first executive team meeting. The boardroom felt colder this time. Sleek, yes, but hostile in its silence. 12 top-level executives, all seated. 11 men, 1 woman. All eyes on her as she entered. She walked in with no assistant, no entourage, just a leather notebook and a worn fountain pen. Her father's, from the factory floor days. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Garrett's chair was empty, symbolically vacant. Everyone noticed. She sat at the head of the table, opened her notebook, and said, "I've read all your reports. I've reviewed the quarterly statements, the public relations audits, and the department evaluations. I also spent the past 3 weeks on the ground floor of this company, unnoticed by all of you. That was intentional." Silence. "I didn't come here to manage numbers," she said. "I came to manage the culture that's rotting this place from the inside." One of the older VPs cleared his throat. "With respect, Ms. Monroe, the board appointed you interim. That's a transitional role, not a transformational one." She looked at him. "Funny. In my experience, transition is where transformation begins." He leaned back, unimpressed. "We've built this company with decades of proven leadership. I hope you're not suggesting we throw that out based on one incident." Evelyn stood, walked to the projector, clicked a button. Footage from the viral video filled the screen. The moment Garrett forced her to her knees, her silent, steady compliance, the gasps, the humiliation. The world had seen it already, but now the boardroom saw it from her eyes. Some turned away, others stared. She paused it. Right at the moment Garrett whispered, "You're just a janitor." Then she said, "This wasn't just an incident. It was a mirror. And I'm not here to polish your reflections. I'm here to shatter the ones that are fake." The internal resistance. By week 2, Evelyn realized the deepest enemy wasn't arrogance, it was apathy. Emails went unanswered. Department heads stalled implementation of the Floorwalk Initiative. Memos were misplaced. Suggestions from lower-tier employees were quietly buried in layers of bureaucracy. And then came the whispers. "She's overreaching. She's emotional. She's running the place like a charity." She was a janitor. What does she know about profit margins? She heard them all. At first, she ignored them. But silence is a dangerous friend. It can either protect your peace or choke your purpose. So she pushed harder. She began shadowing departments unannounced. She spoke to the cafeteria staff during lunch breaks. She asked HR to anonymize every internal complaint ever filed by support staff, then compiled a pattern of abusive mid-level managers who had thrived for years. She confronted them, quietly, one-on-one. No grand speeches, just evidence. "You won't yell at another intern again," she told one man. "You don't get to retaliate with hours every time someone disagrees with you," she told another. She made enemies, but she made something else too. Loyalty. From the unseen. The night letter. One night, Evelyn stayed late, reviewing proposals in the empty executive lounge. The lights were dimmed. The only sound was the low hum of city traffic far below. She found an envelope taped to her door. No name, just a wax seal pressed into a deep crimson circle. Inside was a handwritten note. "Not everyone wants you gone. Some of us have waited years for someone like you to rise. Be careful. They smile with teeth sharpened for sabotage. But keep going. For all of us who've cleaned the spills they refuse to see." No signature, just a paperclip holding a folded sheet, an old staff memo detailing a harassment incident from 2016. Buried, covered up. It had been filed. By a janitor. Disregarded. The accused. Now an executive. Evelyn sat back, the weight of it all pressing against her spine like a stone. Someone out there was still invisible. But not anymore. Breaking the glass ceiling. From the basement. Week 4 brought a press conference. It was supposed to be routine, an update on company direction. But Evelyn didn't do routine. She walked onto the stage in front of a packed room of reporters. Flashes clicked. Microphones buzzed. Then she said, Harrington and Cole will undergo a complete restructuring of its workplace equity systems. Effective immediately, all entry-level and support staff will be included in quarterly feedback reviews that impact executive bonuses. Gasps. Murmurs. One reporter asked, "Won't the board push back on that?" "They can," she said, "but it won't stop what's already begun." Another asked, "Why this? Why now?" She paused, her voice clear, unwavering. "Because the people who hold this company up, who sweep its floors, carry its packages, answer its phones, and clean its restrooms, are no longer invisible, not under my leadership, and not ever again." A call from Garrett. Later that night, her phone rang. Private number. It was him. "Impressive speech," Garrett said. Evelyn didn't respond. He continued, "You're making waves. Real ones. I didn't think you had it in you." "That's the problem with you," she said. "You still see me through the lens of what I once did, not what I've always been capable of." He was quiet. "Why are you calling, Garrett?" "I wanted to know. What's your endgame?" She thought for a moment. "My endgame," she said slowly, "is a world where women like my mother don't have to beg for a raise after 30 years of loyalty. Where janitors aren't shamed for the work that lets executives sleep in clean offices. Where power doesn't mean cruelty." A pause. "Be careful, Evelyn," he warned. "When you lift others, someone always tries to pull you down." She smiled. "Then I'll build steps so high, they won't be able to reach me. A storm is coming." By the end of her first month, Evelyn had become a symbol. Not just of change, but of reckoning. Protesters began appearing outside companies with toxic workplace cultures, holding signs that read, "We see you. Where is your EVELYN? Clean the culture." The New York Times called her the janitor who swept the ceiling clean. But inside the skyscraper walls of Harrington and Cole, forces were aligning. Executives who had been untouchable for years were suddenly held accountable. And they didn't like it. A secret meeting was arranged. A plan formed. And in the shadows of boardroom politics, A storm began to gather. The coup in the shadows. There's a strange thing about success, especially for a black woman who wasn't supposed to have any. It draws applause in public, but in private, it awakens resentment. For every handshake Evelyn received, there were two clenched fists behind closed doors. The corridors of Harrington and Cole had grown quieter, not out of respect, but anticipation. Something was coming, and Evelyn could feel it. The council within the council. Unknown to Evelyn, while she was empowering the overlooked, a circle of the old guard had been forming. They called themselves the Originals. 6 executives who had helped build the empire with Garrett from the ground up. They believed they owned the company, not legally, but spiritually. And now, to them, it had been hijacked. Their plan wasn't sudden. It had started in whispers, cloaked memos, strategic leaks to insider reporters. The goal wasn't just to remove Evelyn. It was to discredit her, to unravel her influence thread by thread, until the world forgot why she ever mattered. And to do that, they'd use the one thing every empire fears: scandal. The setup. It began with a financial audit. A sudden discrepancy was flagged in the human resources budget, specifically tied to Evelyn's new equity incentive program, which reallocated bonus funds toward support staff. Someone claimed the funds had been misappropriated, a whisper of embezzlement. Internal emails were leaked, doctored, rewritten, made to look like Evelyn had bypassed the board. Conversations were taken out of context. Her meetings with lower-tier staff were reframed as covert collusion. Then, an anonymous employee filed a formal complaint. Accusation: abuse of power, favoritism, hostile leadership. The press got wind of it in 48 hours. Media frenzy. Headlines exploded. From Janitor to CEO, and back again. Is Evelyn Monroe abusing her authority, cleaning UP power, or playing the victim? Talk shows debated her rise as a diversity PR stunt. Comment sections were torn between admiration and vitriol. Some called her a trailblazer, others a manipulator. Social media became a battleground. One tweet went viral. When women of color rise too fast, the world suddenly finds missing paperwork. But the damage was done. The board called an emergency vote of confidence. The press showed up outside her home. Her inbox filled with hate and support in equal measure. The spotlight she once used to amplify the unheard was now burning her alive. Betrayal in the ranks. It wasn't just the media. Inside the company, the very people she'd defended, some began to distance themselves. Not out of distrust, but fear. Fear of being next. Fear of losing their jobs. Fear of being labeled as Evelyn's army. She didn't blame them. But it hurt. The worst cut came from Marla, her only ally on the board, the lone woman among the executives. In a closed-door session, Marla stood up and said, "I believe Evelyn acted with good intentions, but intention doesn't excuse recklessness. I vote for her suspension pending investigation." Evelyn's heart didn't break, it hardened. She didn't cry. She wrote down every name of those who voted against her, not for vengeance, for clarity. A call from the past. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her office. The skyline looked different now. Not majestic, just cold. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Evelyn," said a deep, familiar voice. It was Thomas Monroe, her estranged brother, a former lawyer, now retired. They hadn't spoken in 6 years, not since their mother's funeral. She stayed silent. "I saw the news," he said. "They're trying to bury you before your roots have even set." She exhaled. "What do you want, Thomas?" "To help," he said. "I know how they operate. I've been in courtrooms with men like them. You don't win by staying honest. You win by being smarter." "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want justice." "Then let me help you dig," he replied. "Because there's always a trail when cowards try to bring down a queen." The counter-move. For the next 48 hours, Evelyn worked in silence. She didn't make statements. She didn't defend herself in the media. She investigated. With Thomas's help, she traced the complaint back to a mid-level manager in accounting, a man who had once been accused of payroll fraud 5 years earlier. The case had mysteriously disappeared. The digital forensics team, quietly hired off the books, found metadata in the leaked emails, timestamps that didn't match company servers, sentences written with language patterns inconsistent with her own. They even found a draft saved in a shared folder, under Garrett's name. Then came the final blow. A security guard, someone Evelyn had always greeted by name, brought her a USB drive. "I probably shouldn't be doing this," he said, "but you once gave my niece a scholarship through your education fund." This footage was quietly deleted from the internal servers, but I backed it up. It was a video from a private elevator. The originals, all 6 of them, laughing. One of them says, "The moment she falls, the old world returns. Let her clean up that mess." They didn't just sabotage her. They planned it like a heist. Returned to the boardroom. Armed with evidence, Evelyn called for a full board review, not just an emergency session, a formal hearing, public, recorded with legal representation. She walked into that boardroom with her head held high. No tears, no pleading, just truth. One by one, she laid out the documents, the forged emails, the manipulated complaint, the deleted footage, the digital fingerprints, the conspiracy. The original squirmed. Garrett, now just a civilian, watched it unfold from the back row. Some board members sat in stunned silence. Others shifted in shame. Then Evelyn dropped the final sheet. A proposal, signed by the originals, outlining a plan to privatize the company and sell off 40% of its support staff operations to a third-party outsourcing firm. A cost-cutting measure, at the expense of the very workers who kept the company alive. The vote flipped in real time. Unanimous. The originals were fired. Evelyn Monroe was reinstated, not as interim, as permanent CEO, rising from fire. That night, as Evelyn exited the tower, a crowd waited. Janitors, clerks, assistants, drivers, receptionists, engineers, people from all departments. They clapped. No fanfare, just respect. An intern held up a handmade sign. She cleaned floors, then she cleaned house. Evelyn didn't wave. She didn't pose. She just whispered to herself, "Not invisible anymore."